Today I'm talking about one of my favourite cameras of all time, and it is a camera that I have talked about before and done a video on, but not this precise model. The camera I'm going to talk about is the Nikon Nikkormat, and in particular the Nikkormat FT2. What I've talked about before is the FTN, which was an earlier model from the 1960s. This is a model that came out in 1975, and it has one or two additions to the previous model, and I find it a fantastic camera to use. The history of Nikon, in particular with single lenses, is firmly rooted in the Nikon F. The Nikon F, which came out 1960, was a fantastic camera, but it was a camera with a price, and it was not a cheap camera, and it was mainly used by professional photographers. And Nikon obviously wanted to have some of the amateur market, and Nikon in the mid-60s brought out something called the Nikkormat, which is a slightly lower spec camera but still extremely well made and a quality camera. And what was fascinating was that so many professional photographers actually used the Nikkormat as their second body. And this camera that I'm going to talk about today has an interesting lens as well. This lens is a Nikon 20mm lens, and it came from a professional photographer called Marcus Harrison, who was a photographer from Australia that in the 1950s was the staff photographer at the Stork Club in London, and he took some amazing photographs. I had the pleasure to meet him, and I have this lens which had belonged to him, so I'm very partial to this lens, and I think the two are a good combination. And what was interesting about Marcus's equipment was he had a lot of Nikons. He had, from my memory, a Nikon F, I think it was a F3. However, he had 3 or 4 Nikkormat bodies. He had superb lenses, but used them often on a Nikkormat. And the other thing about Marcus is he used this lens quite a lot for landscape and for photographing gardens. Okay, he did a lot of articles for Houses and Homes and those sort of magazines in the 1980s. So let's get back to the camera. It feels like a camera. It's heavy, but it's lighter than the Nikon F. It takes a slightly different battery than the previous Nikkormat. It takes a LR44, which is a slightly smaller battery and is easy to obtain. So battery goes in there. The film, you open them from the bottom here. Do check the light seals. I've actually put a new light seal on here. They do go, so that's something to check if you buy one of these. The difference about the FT2 is this: the handle here, the ride-on handle, has this plastic on it. It still sticks out into your eye if you are left eye, because the rays which these cameras on for metering, you should just pull that out and that switches on the meter. So let's talk a little bit about how to use these. Obviously focus manually. Then in the window you have a lever indicating over and under exposure. You also have this indicator here of whether you are over or under exposed, which I find really useful, and you used to get this as well on the Carl Zeiss cameras, and it perhaps goes back to some of those cameras. So you can look down on your camera and you can meter without looking through the lens. You can actually meter by looking at the top of the camera, and you've got your aperture control there, plus you've got your shutter speed control here, and the shutter speed is on near the lens here, which is quite different to the Pentaxes and other makes of camera at the time, the Minoltas. They all had the shutter speeds up here. The shutter speed on the Nikkormat is, as I say, near the lens, And that enables you to have all the controls on your left hand. You can control the shutter speed and the aperture. And as a photographer, I find that extremely useful. So, and the top button here, if you are wondering, that is your depth of field. So that will close up your aperture so you can see how much is in focus or not in focus. I love the design of this counter here. It's iconic and it's extremely clear. So as I said, for using focus and aperture there and shutter speed there, and you have the needle in the middle. One slight problem with some of these Nikkormats, and they are getting to be about 40 years old now, is that I think the diodes suffer and the capacitors, and I find quite often the meters will work but can be a bit jerky. Great thing is, being such a manual camera, you can use the Sunny 16 rule, or you can use a meter. You don't have to depend on the camera meter. And the shutter is manual, so even without a battery, the shutter will still work. I took this out and I was delighted how well it was to use. Let's look at some of the results. I've been looking forward for taking this camera out for quite a long time, and this lens, this 20mm lens with the yellow filter, really helps to darken the sky. And here we have Stinsford Church near Dorchester in Dorset, and the clouds have come out nicely because they're just slightly darkened by the filter. I did notice, I think, a little bit of glare on the left hand side of the lens. I think I had an issue with a mark on the yellow filter, and when I got home I gave the filter a really good clean and look forward for taking it out again. But I was really pleased with the effect of the wide angle lens. Here we are by the river, and you get the effect of the water. The trees, I think, really stand out in winter, where you can get the full effect of the trees and any paths. The lens, okay, you might have issues sometimes with some of the perspective, but for general landscapes I think it's an excellent lens. I was really pleased with these sluice gates here. Again, these feature in the novel The Mayor of Castlebrooke by Thomas Hardy, and we look back towards the town of Dorchester, and these sluice gates again, and the clouds have come out quite well. This last image, well, there's two images. This one, again, I'm pleased with the contrast. This is using former 100 film. And this image here, you could almost imagine I had a red filter on the camera. I didn't. It was yellow, and I think it works effectively and was the effect I wanted for the place and for the time. So, if you do find a Nikon and a Nikkormat, this is a FT2. I think they are really good value cameras. You can still get the body between £40 and £100 if you look carefully. I think they are fantastic value. Meters can be a little bit iffy, but you can always use it on manual. Thanks for watching.